Look, I thought I'd seen everything living in this condominium. But then she came. This woman arrived like she was buying the whole street on a mortgage. For the first week, it was just a crooked look, those little passes on the sidewalk that looked more like an army inspection, you know? And then, out of nowhere, boom, cameras. Not one, not two, four. And all of them, absolutely all of them, pointed straight at my yard. Yes, mine. Where I water the plants without a shirt on. Where the dog pees on the coconut tree. Where I turn up the stereo on Saturday afternoons and drink my cold beer while chatting with my friends. That's right. The woman simply decided that this was now her own private Big Brother. At first, I thought it was paranoia. I thought, no, it must be the wrong angle of the installation. But then I looked closer and, my friend, the camera lenses were practically staring at me as if to say, go on, do something, we're recording. I swear one of them followed me as I got up from my chair. And you know what's funniest? She never spoke to me. She never asked me for anything. She never knocked on my door. She just arrived, installed the cameras, and that was that. As if my life was now public domain. And the most ridiculous thing was that she swore she was right, as if she was doing a good deed for the safety of the neighborhood. Perimeter monitoring. That's what she told the landlord, who passed it on to me with the look of someone who's already tired of her bullshit. But monitoring what, exactly? What's in my backyard? A lemon tree, a barbecue, and a blind dog with one eye. What's the threat? What if the lemon gets too ripe and explodes? I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The craziest thing was that she said she was worried about noise. She complained to the condominium group that the sound of voices coming from the yard next door was disturbing her peace and quiet. Ah, my child, if you're bothered by voices, imagine when you discover that life has sound, color, and people. Each message in the group was like a police report, and each one, of course, ended with, I'm already taking action. But what annoyed me most wasn't even the camera itself. It was the way she looked when she walked past. That, I know everything about you, even how many beers you drank last Saturday, look. A look that said, I'm watching you. And I felt a chill run down my spine, even though I didn't want to. Because it was invasive. Because it was uncomfortable. Because it was, above all, wrong. I even tried to solve it by talking. I sent a polite message, asking if I could adjust the angle of the cameras so that they weren't pointing directly at me. She saw it and replied with a, these cameras are totally within the law. That was it. That was it. No good night, no politeness, no empathy at all. That's when I realized this story wasn't going to end with diplomacy. I was being filmed every day, inside my own home, in the space that I paid for, that I take care of. That is mine. And the woman standing there with the cleanest face on the planet, saying that everything was cool. I felt like I'd been cast in a reality TV show without having signed a contract. So I started documenting everything. I took photos, recorded videos, wrote down the times. I became a kind of detective of my own privacy. Every click she made turned over a new page in my collection of evidence. Because if she wanted to play the surveillance game, then we'd play along. By now, I was becoming paranoid. I could no longer leave the house without looking around, as if I were an escapee trying to escape the prison X-ray. I'd wake up wondering if she'd seen my pierced pajamas, if the dog was digging too many holes, if the barbecue lit on Sunday would be the subject of another dramatic bulletin in the neighborhood group. I became a prisoner in my own home. And the most surreal thing was that nobody did anything about it. The landlord said he couldn't interfere in the individual freedom of the residents and the neighbors. Well, some even commented to me that it was bizarre, but they were all afraid to confront the woman. She was the type who collected rules from the condominium bylaws like they were rare figurines. She knew every comma. She used it like a sword in battle. One day, without exaggeration, she took a printout of the security system and sent it to the street group with the caption, "Suspicious activity detected at 2217 in the yard next door." Suspicious activity in this case, was me watering the plants in shorts and flip-flops, with the hose slung over my shoulder. I almost replied, "Sorry about keeping my garden hydrated, detective." But at that point, the joke had stopped being funny. I felt invaded in every possible way. It wasn't just about cameras, it was about control, about abuse, about someone thinking they could stick their eye into your routine and call it security. Safety for whom? Because the only person who felt protected was her. I was living on alert, suspicious even of my reflection in the window. I tried to ignore it. I swear I tried. I tried to live life as if I didn't have a lunatic with a surveillance HQ installed on my balcony. But how do you pretend to be normal when you can't even scratch your butt in the backyard without thinking you might have become a meme in a secret Facebook group? There came a point when my patience snapped. I'd already tried to be polite, have an adult conversation, seek dialogue, and I got a cold legal response. So I decided to do it the way she would understand. I went straight to the lawyer, an acquaintance of mine who already dealt with neighborhood cases, that sort of thing. When I showed him the photos of the cameras pointed at my yard, he let out a, "This is a full plate." He explained that yes, residents have the right to have cameras in their homes, but when those cameras invade someone else's space, filming places that are for their exclusive and private use, like a fenced yard, where the expectation of privacy is guaranteed, things take a different turn. It's an invasion of privacy, it's abuse, and it can lead to quite a lawsuit. I left that office with a mixture of relief and renewed anger. Relief because, finally, someone had told me that this wasn't normal. Anger because I knew she would continue to think she was the vigilante of the street until she had a legal scare. So I did what I had to do. I documented everything in an even more organized way. I took photos of the angles, videos showing the camera following me, recorded audio of the dog barking at the noise of the engine turning as I passed. I also took screenshots of the messages she sent in the group, where she made it clear that the cameras were there to keep track of what was happening in the neighborhood. And I took everything to the lawyer. He put the case together, attached everything, prepared that pile of papers that we know the courts love, and he filed the lawsuit. Invasion of privacy, moral damages, a request for compensation, and the immediate removal of the cameras, or adjustment of the angles. Now, if you think that made her back down, oh, my friend, the woman went berserk. When she received the notice, she showed up at my gate with the letter in her hand, shaking it like it was the new will. She spoke loudly, gesticulating, saying that I was attacking the safety of the neighborhood, that she was going to mobilize the residents against this absurdity, and that justice was on the side of those who protect. I didn't even open the gate. I just watched through the curtain, sipping my coffee, because honestly, at that point, the only protection I wanted was from her, against the spirit of the frustrated policewoman who thought that putting cameras in other people's faces was a form of love for the community. And even after the notification, she left everything as it was. She kept the cameras on, filming my yard, as if nothing had happened, as if justice was just another obstacle that she could ignore with the confidence of someone who has never been held accountable in her life. The most curious thing about this whole story was noticing how the people around me gradually began to take a stand. Before, everyone pretended they didn't see it. They just laughed nervously when I talked about the cameras or said, "Wow, she's a bit of an exaggeration, isn't she?" But all it took was for the process to start rolling for the neighborhood to become more attentive. It was as if the fact that I had gone head-to-head with her had sparked courage in those who, until then, had only swallowed the abuse dry. There was a neighbor who called me at the gate to tell me that she was also watching his daughter playing in the garden, and that once he heard the noise of the camera turning when the girl appeared on her scooter. Another told me that she had stopped doing yoga in the backyard for fear of appearing in a video she called a safety record. Each report was another brick in the wall of disgust that the street was creating around her figure. But the woman wasn't shaken. On the contrary, It was as if she was on a divine mission, with an ego inflated by years of micropower within a residents' association that was more like a sect disguised as a neighborhood club. And like a good monitoring messiah, she walked around with a tablet in her hand, checking what the cameras had captured, as if it were some kind of confidential CIA report. And what made me the sickest was the open pleasure of knowing that she was a nuisance. She made a point of walking down the sidewalk in front of me, looking straight into my yard with a cynical little smile, as if to say, "I can still see you." It seemed that the mere fact that someone was living there without asking her permission was reason enough to get into the trenches. But then justice finally showed up. The bailiff showed up at her door with the warrant, and this time it wasn't a notice. It was an order. She had to remove or adjust all the cameras that invaded the private space of other residents. And, of course, to pay compensation for moral damages for the time that I had had my privacy taken from me, as if I were a piece of merchandise. She tried to dodge. She said that the cameras were there for the sole purpose of inhibiting suspicious acts, that she had never intended to cause discomfort to anyone, and that even several neighbors felt safer with the presence of the system. Several neighbors who, curiously, disappeared when the hearing was scheduled. No one wanted to testify in her favor. No one wanted to confirm this story of collective security, because in the end, everyone knew it was personal. It was pure control. It was a power game poorly disguised as protection. The hearing was a show in itself. She arrived with the pose of someone who thought she was going to convince the judge with half a dozen arguments copied from the association's handbook. She spoke about security, moral values, and the duty of citizens to look after the community. A speech worthy of a frustrated coach. But then the lawyer showed the videos, the photos, the group messages, a recording of a conversation in which she said, in no uncertain terms, that she didn't trust the behavior of the neighbors next door. When the images were projected, showing the camera moving on its own to follow me from one side of the yard to the other, while I swept up dry leaves with a Monday face, I almost laughed. Because it was clear. It was crystal clear. This wasn't about safety. It was about control, about obsession, about a person who confused a neighborhood with a barracks. And then the judge, with all the serenity in the world, explained to her that what she was doing was illegal, invasive, abusive, that no one is obliged to be watched in their backyard by a neighbor's camera, that privacy is not a luxury, it's a right. She turned white. She tried to argue once more, saying that she was being unfairly persecuted, that I was trying to smear her reputation in the neighborhood. But the judge didn't even blink. He confirmed the decision. A fine for moral damages, removal of the cameras, a ban on installing new equipment aimed at neighboring properties without formal authorization. And there, for the first time since this soap opera began, I saw a trace of fragility in her. Not the fragility of those who regret it, but of those who lose, of someone who realizes that the world doesn't revolve around their own navel. She left the courtroom without looking me in the face. She left at a fast pace, holding her bag against her chest as if it were a shield. The next day, the technicians were there, dismantling the system, removing every single camera. She stood on the balcony, arms crossed, watching from afar, with an expression that mixed hatred and humiliation. And you know what? It was beautiful to see, because for months she had been in control. Now she was the one watching everything being turned off, with absolutely nothing she could do. I knew she wouldn't swallow defeat. That kind of person can't accept losing even an odd or even game, let alone a lawsuit with the right to a fine public humiliation and the demolition of their private camera empire. Of course, it didn't take long for her to find a new way to continue the soap opera. If before it was technology that she used to control everything, now it would be gossip. And look, she outdid herself. She started doing what she does best, poisoning others. She would drop by the neighbors' houses like she was handing out salvation pamphlets, saying, Did you know he filed a lawsuit against me because he felt uncomfortable with the security cameras? With that tone of voice that mixes Mexican drama with conspiracy theory, she painted the story as if I was an antisocial maniac who hated the community and wanted to turn the street into a war zone. But the best part was her victimizing herself. She said she was now afraid to leave the house because I could be waiting for retaliation. Guys, I barely have the patience to answer emails from work, let alone the time to come up with a revenge plot for a 9 o'clock soap opera. She wanted to make it seem like I was a danger to public order, when all I wanted was to be able to water the plants in my underwear without being filmed. Only this time, the neighborhood didn't buy into her delirium so easily. Most of them had already experienced at least one strange situation with this woman, and after everything that happened, they became more attentive. They began to see the pattern. They began to realize that it wasn't about me. It was about her need to have someone to control, to watch over, to accuse, because without that, her world loses its meaning. And it was in this climate that she began to fall apart on her own. She stopped showing up at association meetings, stopped walking around with her tablet in her hand, and gradually faded away. But before she disappeared for good, she tried one more final act worthy of a cheap soap opera. One morning, my doorbell rang. It was an employee of a law firm delivering a new notice. She, our decadent star of other people's control, was suing me for moral damage caused to her social integrity and community reputation. When I read that, I laughed out loud. Alone, in the middle of the room, I thought, this woman is a joke. The lawyer took care of everything. The defense was easier than frying an egg. The judge looked at the file, read the documents, saw that her attempt was just another sigh of wounded ego, and dismissed the case with a speed that even a fast food queue can't manage. And this time, the fall was even worse, because she had to bear the costs of the lawsuit she invented herself. A shot in the foot, the kind that even resonates. After that, she disappeared. No one saw her walking down the street anymore. No one received any messages from her in the condominium group. It was as if she had evaporated. Some languages said that she had put her house up for sale. Others said that she still lived there, but spent her days locked away, far from the eyes she used to make a point of watching. Me? I didn't even want to know. When a storm finally passes, you don't chase after the cloud to see where it went. You just give thanks that the sky is blue again. And since then, my life has returned to normal. A normal that feels like luxury. After months of being the protagonist of an involuntary reality show, I can water my plants, barbecue with friends, and play with the dog without fear of becoming the subject of domestic surveillance. The yard is mine again. Peace is back. But the craziest thing about all this is thinking about how one person's obsession can affect so many people. How someone who believes they are doing good can become the exact opposite of what they preach. Because, at the end of the day, it wasn't about cameras. It was about control, about thinking you have more right to peace and quiet than others, about not being able to live with the simple fact that everyone has their own space, their own time, their own life. This story taught me that defending your privacy sometimes takes more courage than you think, that there are people who will go to any lengths to stay on top of an illusion of power. But it also showed me that justice, however slow, sometimes hits the mark. And when it does, there's no camera lens that can register the shame on the faces of those who have spent too much time looking at other people's lives and have forgotten to look after their own. And don't forget to leave your like and opinion here in the comments.